Night had already settled over the city when Adrian noticed her sitting alone near the edge of the old stone fountain. The streets around them were alive with noise, cars moving endlessly, distant laughter spilling from cafes, music escaping through half-open windows, but around her there was silence, almost deliberate, as if the world itself had stepped back to let her think. She wasn't extraordinary in the obvious way. No dramatic beauty. No desperate attempt to attract attention. Yet every man who passed her glanced twice, not because she demanded attention, but because she seemed untouched by the need for it. Adrian hesitated before approaching. For years, he believed he understood women. Attraction, affection, desire, he had studied all of it the way a strategist studies battle. He knew what to say, how to appear confident, how to create mystery. And still, every relationship in his life ended the same way, confusion disguised as heartbreak. Because what he never understood was this. Women rarely fall in love with what a man says. They fall in love with what they feel in his presence. And most men spend their entire lives performing instead of becoming. "Do you always look this serious?" she asked suddenly, without lifting her eyes from the water. Adrian smirked. "Do you always talk to strangers?" "Only the ones pretending not to be lonely." The word struck harder than he expected. He sat beside her slowly. There was something unsettling about being seen so quickly by someone you had never met before. Most conversations are negotiations. People hide themselves behind charm, humor, status, carefully selected stories. But some individuals carry a dangerous kind of awareness. They observe quietly while others perform loudly. Her name was Elena. And within minutes, Adrian realized something strange. She never chased conversation. She allowed silence to expose people. That was the first lesson he would never forget. Most men fear silence because silence reveals insecurity. But women are drawn to emotional certainty more than endless words. Stoicism teaches that power begins where the need for validation ends. And Elena seemed to embody that principle effortlessly. As they spoke, Adrian noticed she rarely answered directly. Instead, she watched him carefully after every question, almost as if she cared less about his words and more about the emotional state beneath them. "How long was your last relationship?" she asked. 2 years. "And why did it end?" He gave the answer he always gave. "We wanted different things." She nodded slowly, but her eyes narrowed with quiet disbelief. "No," she said softly. "One of you wanted certainty. The other wanted emotional excitement. That's usually what destroys people." Adrian laughed lightly, but internally something shifted. Because she was right. 4 months after the breakup, he obsessed over what he said wrong, what he could have done differently, whether he could have saved it somehow. But beneath all that analysis was a simpler truth he refused to face. He was terrified of losing her, and she felt that fear long before he ever admitted it. That is the hidden psychology few men understand. Desperation is never invisible. Women sense emotional dependency the way sailors sense storms before the sky changes color. Even when a man hides it behind confidence, success, or charm, it leaks through subtle behaviors. The need for reassurance, over-explaining, constant availability, the inability to walk away. And the cruel irony is this. The more a man fears losing someone, the more likely he is to lose them. Stoicism never taught emotional coldness. It taught emotional self-mastery. There is a difference. The Stoic man loves deeply, but he does not abandon himself in the process. He understands that attachment becomes dangerous the moment his peace depends entirely on another person's presence. Elena turned toward him. "You know what makes women feel unsafe?" she asked. Adrian expected her to mention anger, aggression, dishonesty. Instead, she said, "A man without control over himself." The fountain water reflected the city lights like fractured stars. "Most people think women want perfection," she continued. "But perfection is exhausting. What women truly search for is emotional steadiness. Someone whose mood isn't controlled by attention, rejection, praise, or fear." Adrian looked down at his hands quietly. Because every relationship he had ever entered was built on emotional reaction. If a woman pulled away, he panicked internally. If she became distant, he pursued harder. If she gave affection, he felt powerful again. His emotional state was never truly his own. And that dependence poisoned everything. Elena smiled faintly, almost sadly. Women test emotional strength without even realizing they're doing it, she said. Not because they enjoy manipulation, but because deep down they need to know whether your calm is real or just an act that disappears under pressure. A cold wind moved through the street. For the first time in years, Adrian stopped defending himself internally. He stopped searching for techniques, strategies, psychological tricks. Instead, he confronted the uncomfortable truth hiding beneath all his failed relationships. He had spent his life trying to be chosen, instead of becoming a man who chose himself first. And suddenly, the entire nature of attraction began to make sense. Because the most magnetic people in the world are rarely the most beautiful. They are the most emotionally grounded. There is something profoundly attractive about someone who remains centered in a world addicted to emotional chaos. Someone who does not beg for attention, does not collapse under rejection, does not manipulate for affection, does not lose dignity in pursuit of validation. That kind of calm feels rare now, almost dangerous. Elena stood slowly from the fountain's edge and looked at him one last time before stepping away into the glowing streets. But before leaving, she said something Adrian would remember for the rest of his life. Love reveals who has discipline and who only has desire. Adrian watched her disappear into the crowd, yet somehow the silence she left behind felt louder than the city itself. For several minutes he remained motionless beside the fountain, replaying her words over and over in his mind. Love reveals who has discipline and who only has desire. Most men, he realized, confuse intensity with depth. They believe obsession is passion. Jealousy is care. Attachment is love. But Stoicism teaches something far more uncomfortable. If you cannot govern your emotions will govern your relationships. And relationships ruled by uncontrolled emotion eventually collapse under their own weight. That night Adrian walked home differently. Not with sadness. Not with excitement. But with awareness. For the first time, he noticed how much of his identity had been built around external approval. Every achievement, every conversation, every relationship carried the hidden desire to feel valuable through someone else's eyes. Even confidence, at times, had merely been carefully disguised insecurity. The next morning he found himself reaching instinctively for his phone. No message from Elena. A familiar anxiety began creeping into his chest. Should he text her first? Would waiting make him appear distant? Would messaging too early seem desperate? Then he caught himself. The mind becomes chaotic when self-worth depends on outcomes. That was the real prison. Not rejection. Not heartbreak. But dependence on emotional results outside your control. He placed the phone back down. Stoicism teaches that peace begins when a man separates effort from attachment. You can express interest without surrendering your emotional stability. You can care deeply without making another person the center of your psychological existence. Most people never learn this. Instead, they enter relationships carrying invisible hunger. And hunger changes behavior. It causes overthinking, neediness, emotional volatility, the constant urge to secure reassurance. Ironically, these behaviors slowly destroy attraction itself. Because attraction thrives in emotional freedom, not emotional captivity. Days passed before Adrian saw Elena again. It happened unexpectedly in a quiet bookstore near the older part of the city. Rain tapped softly against the windows while strangers wandered silently between shelves pretending not to notice one another. She stood near the philosophy section, turning pages of a worn book with complete calm. No rush. No performance. No need to occupy space loudly. When she noticed him, she smiled lightly. "You look different," she said. "I slept." "No," she replied softly. "You stopped chasing something." Her observation unsettled him again because it was true. For the first time in years, he had stopped mentally running after outcomes. He stopped imagining future scenarios, stopped analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning, stopped measuring his value through female attention. And strangely, the less he chased validation, the more grounded he became. That is the paradox most men never understand. Neediness repels not because wanting love is weak, but because losing yourself for love is. A Stoic does not suppress emotion. He simply refuses to become enslaved by it. Elena closed the book gently. "You know why many women pull away?" she asked. Adrian leaned against the shelf quietly. "Why?" "Because many men meet beauty with obsession instead of presence." He frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "When a man becomes emotionally consumed too quickly, a woman stops feeling his strength. She starts feeling his dependency." Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. "Most men look at women and immediately think about keeping them," she continued. "But calm men simply experience them. There's no panic in them. No silent desperation." Adrian thought back to every relationship he had ruined by trying too hard to hold on. Too many messages. Too much reassurance. Too much emotional surrender too early. He had mistaken emotional intensity for emotional honesty. But intensity without stability becomes chaos. And chaos eventually exhausts love. Elena walked slowly through the aisle while speaking. "Women are deeply emotional," she said, "but they are also deeply observant. They notice the things men think they hide." "Like what?" "Fear." The word landed heavily. Fear of abandonment. Fear of replacement. Fear of not being enough. A man may hide it behind confidence, ambition, even arrogance, but emotional fear always leaks through behavior. Adrian stayed silent. Because he understood now. Many men do not actually love women. They use women to escape feelings of inadequacy within themselves. That is why rejection feels devastating to them. Not because they lost someone they loved, but because they lost someone who temporarily made them feel worthy. And once that illusion disappears, they collapse internally. Stoicism tears apart this illusion completely. Your worth cannot depend on another human being's presence, attention, or affection. The moment it does, fear enters the relationship. And fear quietly destroys authenticity. Elena stopped walking and looked directly into his eyes. "Do you know what feels safest to a woman?" He shook his head. "A man who wants her, but does not need her to feel complete." The bookstore suddenly felt smaller, quieter, as if every sentence was exposing truths Adrian had spent years avoiding. Because deep down, he knew she was describing the kind of man he had never truly become. A man capable of love without losing discipline. Desire without desperation. Connection without dependency. And perhaps the most dangerous realization of all began forming slowly in his mind. Love was never supposed to complete him. It was supposed to reveal him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rain outside intensified, streaking the windows with silver lines that blurred the city lights into soft shadows. Somewhere deeper in the bookstore, pages turned quietly, footsteps echoed, then faded again into silence. Adrian felt something unfamiliar growing inside him. Not excitement. Not infatuation. Clarity. And clarity can be terrifying when a person has spent years living inside emotional illusion. He looked at Elena carefully. "What if someone already lost themselves in love?" he asked quietly. She studied him for a moment before answering. "Then pain becomes their teacher." Simple words, but brutally true. Most people avoid pain because they believe suffering is punishment. Stoicism sees it differently. Pain exposes attachment. It reveals where emotion has overpowered wisdom. Heartbreak is not always the loss of another person. Sometimes it is the destruction of the identity we built around them. Adrian remembered the version of himself after his last relationship ended. The sleepless nights. The obsessive thoughts. The constant checking of messages. The silent hope that one phone call could restore his peace. At the time, he called it love. Now he saw it differently. It was withdrawal. He had become addicted to emotional validation, and when it disappeared, his mind collapsed into panic. Elena walked toward the window slowly. "People talk about love as if it's purely emotional," she said. "But real love reveals emotional discipline more than emotion itself." "How?" She folded her arms gently. "Because anyone can stay during pleasure. Anyone can be affectionate when they feel secure. But very few people remain grounded when uncertainty appears." That sentence stayed suspended between them. Uncertainty. The emotion most people secretly cannot tolerate. The need to know where they stand. The need for reassurance. The need for guarantees. And yet, love offers none of those things permanently. That is why emotionally weak people suffer endlessly in relationships. They attempt to control what cannot be controlled, another person's feelings, attention, loyalty, timing. Stoicism teaches acceptance of uncertainty without emotional collapse. Not indifference. Strength. There is a difference. Adrian lowered his gaze. "I think most of my relationships were built on fear," he admitted. Elena nodded as if she had known from the beginning. "Most are." "Fear of what?" "Being abandoned. Being forgotten. Being unworthy." The truth of it hit him immediately. People often believe they are searching for love, when in reality they are searching for relief from inner emptiness. And this changes everything. Because when someone enters a relationship empty, they begin demanding from the other person what they should have built within themselves. Peace. Identity. Purpose. Self-worth. No human being can carry that weight forever. Eventually they pull away. Not always because they stopped caring, but because being responsible for another person's emotional survival becomes exhausting. Elena turned back toward him. "You know what's strange?" she asked softly. "What?" "The strongest people in love are usually the ones most capable of walking away." Adrian frowned. "That sounds cold." "No," she replied calmly. "It sounds free." He stayed silent, because deep down, he understood exactly what she meant. A person who cannot walk away is not choosing love freely. They are trapped by attachment. That is why desperation feels heavy in relationships. It removes choice. It transforms affection into emotional dependency. But when someone remains capable of standing alone, their love becomes cleaner, calmer, more genuine. Stoicism was never about avoiding connection. It was about entering connection without surrendering inner stability. Outside, the rain finally began slowing. The city lights reflected across the wet streets like broken mirrors. Adrian noticed how peaceful Elena seemed even during silence. She never rushed to fill empty moments with meaningless conversation. She seemed comfortable simply existing without constant stimulation. Most people cannot tolerate that anymore. Silence forces them to confront themselves. So they drown their minds in noise. Messages. Attention. Social media. Temporary attraction. Constant emotional drama. Anything to avoid facing the uncomfortable truth within. Elena picked up another book absent-mindedly. "Modern relationships are strange," she murmured. "How so?" "People crave depth but fear vulnerability. They want loyalty but worship endless options. They want calm love while feeding emotional chaos." Adrian gave a quiet laugh. "That's true." "No," she said gently. "It's tragic." The word lingered heavily. Because she was right. Many people no longer experience love naturally. They experience performance. Carefully crafted personalities. Strategic texting. Emotional games disguised as confidence. Detachment pretending to be strength. But beneath all of it is fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of intimacy. Fear of being truly seen. And perhaps that is why genuinely calm people feel so rare now. They have nothing to prove. Elena looked directly at him again. "The Stoics believed something most people still don't understand," she said quietly. "You cannot control whether someone loves you. You can only control whether you remain honorable while loving them." Adrian felt the sentence settle deeply inside him. Because for years, he had approached relationships like negotiations. How to keep attraction. How to avoid losing someone. How to secure affection. But love was never meant to be controlled like a possession. The tighter people hold, the faster things break. And suddenly he understood why some relationships feel suffocating while others feel peaceful. One is built on fear. The other on freedom. Elena smiled faintly, almost as if she could see his mind changing in real time. Then she asked him a question no one had ever asked before. When nobody is validating you, who are you? The question hollowed out the silence between them. Adrian opened his mouth slightly, then stopped. For years he would have answered quickly. A successful man. A loyal partner. An ambitious person. Someone worthy of being loved. But now every answer felt incomplete. Because each identity depended on someone else witnessing it. Validation had become so deeply woven into his sense of self that he barely knew who he was without it. And perhaps that was the hidden crisis of modern love. People no longer enter relationships as whole individuals. They enter as unfinished souls hoping another person will repair their internal emptiness. Elena watched him carefully. The reason many relationships fail, she said softly, is because people use love to escape themselves. Outside, the rain had stopped completely. The city breathed in silence for a brief moment before the distant sound of traffic returned again. Adrian leaned against the shelf slowly. How do you stop needing validation? He asked. Elena smiled faintly. You stop negotiating your worth through other people's attention. Simple. But almost impossible for most people. Because from childhood, people are conditioned to seek approval. Approval from parents. From society. From friends. From lovers.